I want to thank all the speakers who've agreed to take part, and especially to Deborah, who's joining us from Ghana, and also to the input from the Sri Lankan coconut farmers in terms of who've recorded their contribution for us for this session today. With COP26 having taken place not that long ago in Glasgow, and with the intensifying climate crisis, we're asked regularly here at the forum about the impact of buying goods that are produced internationally and transported here, and the effect that has on climate change. So what we're looking to do today is explore some of those issues around fair trade products and the effect upon the climate in terms of the way in which we consume products and how we choose the products that we purchase and consume. Today's event is, of course, part of Fairtrade Fortnight, and it's about, as I say, understanding the actions being taken throughout the supply chain to address the climate crisis, from producers to suppliers to consumers. It's about considering the impact of trade and consumption on climate change. It's about separating fair trade consumption from the damage caused by hyperconsumption. And it's about focusing on fair trade as a business model that supports people and planet and not just profit. And we'll hear from producers from both the production and consumption perspectives, both focusing on dealing with the climate emergency. The message is clear: fair trade farmers are dealing with the climate crisis now, and they're leading the way in terms of adjusting farming practices to deal with the impact of the crisis on their livelihoods. And fair trade offers an ethical choice for consumers, and as consumers here in Scotland and around the world, we need to stand with farmers and workers dealing with the climate crisis now more than ever by consuming ethically and consciously, and by choosing fair trade. With those opening comments, I'll hand over to Catherine to take us through today's programme.
Thanks, Martin. So we're going to start today by hearing from Tracy Mitchell, Managing Director of Just Trading Scotland, JTS, a fair trade enterprise set up to facilitate the import and distribution of fairly traded food products to the UK. She'll talk about JTS's action to ensure respect for the environment while highlighting the balancing act fair trade businesses face when guided by the 10 principles of fair trade in the bigger picture. Tracy's going to show us a short video from 2 Sri Lankan coconut farmers who supply Ma's Kitchen, who in turn supply GTS with fair trade and organic coconut milk. We'll see the producers at the start of the supply chain, how climate change is impacting them, and understand GTS's concern for both people and planet as they take climate action. So good morning, Tracy, and thanks very much for joining us, and over to you.
Good morning, Catherine, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm going to share a presentation, although I'm not going to sort of talk in masses of detail to the presentation. So let me just see if I can get that going. Catherine, can you nod if that's working? Right, excellent. So thank you for the introduction. Yes, I work at JTS, and I have been there since it started. JTS is based in Paisley and owned by the Balmoral Trust. For JTS, Fairtrade Fortnight is really important. As many of you will know, JTS started 13 years ago with the arrival of a container of Kilombero rice from Malawi just in time for Fairtrade Fortnight 2009. Ever since, we've been involved in Fairtrade Fortnight events and promotions with the aim of spreading the word and increasing sales. As a fair trade business, we do this because it helps us in our mission to empower producers and their communities. As a Fair Trade Foundation post some time ago said, it's a scandalous reality that millions of farmers and workers are still being ripped off despite working hard to provide the produce we love. Unfairness in global trade is rooted in centuries of exploitation. And at that point, they encouraged us to come on in to fair trade. So I'm really pleased to be here at the Scottish Fair Trade Forum event for Fair Trade Fortnight, although I think it's really important to stress right from the outset that the issues that we're talking about today are certainly not ones that JTS feels it has all the answers to, or indeed that I feel very qualified to talk about. What I can talk about is some of the issues we're grappling with as a business. JTS recognises that trade justice is very linked with environmental justice. We're increasingly concerned about the effects of climate change on our producer partners and their communities. Whilst our mission is clear about the importance of empowering producers through the fair purchasing and sale of food products, we recognise that there are significant trade-offs inherent in our business model. Importing foods, often as finished goods, from overseas has an environmental impact which needs to be balanced with the developmental benefits. Within this context, we're committed to continually improving our environmental performance. Where appropriate, we encourage our customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders to do the same. JTS is, as I have said, a fair trade business, and in 2020 we were thrilled to be granted guaranteed member status of the World Fair Trade Organization. This means we've been audited against the 10 principles of fair trade. Principle 10 is respect for the environment. And last year, WFTO members voted to strengthen this principle in response to the growing climate crisis. Specifically, Principle 10 encourages importers to give priority to buying products made from raw materials that originate from sustainably managed sources and have the least overall impact on the environment, including buying from producers who use organic or low pesticide production methods wherever possible. All organisations are encouraged to use recycled or easily biodegradable materials for packing to the extent that that's possible, and to dispatch goods by sea wherever that's possible. Groups are encouraged to reduce energy consumption and use renewable energy, again, wherever possible, and to minimise pollution and the wider impact of their waste streams. At JTS, as in any fair trade business, we need to balance actions in support of Principle 10 with the requirements of the other 9 principles. In response to our WFTO audit, last year we reviewed our environmental policy. This isn't simply a paper policy, it's genuinely something that's driving action. And some examples are, we replaced the lighting in our warehouse with new energy efficient lighting. We have significantly increased our organic range, conscious of the benefits this brings to the planet. We've taken an active part in Veganuary, highlighting the benefits of introducing plant-based meals to your diet and increasing the range of vegan-friendly recipes that we have on our website. We've supported our parent charity, the Balmoral Trust, as they've raised funds for a briquette project led by women farmers in Malawi. This is seeking to reduce deforestation and waste by creating fuel briquettes from rice husks, a project that won a Scottish Fair Trade Forum award last autumn. We've launched new resources within our 90 kilo challenge packs to enable schools to teach about climate change with a real life example. And we've initiated a strategic review of our waste streams, aiming to further increase the percentage that we recycle. This is building on an existing process to avoid food waste by monitoring any short-dated stock really closely. If sales aren't sufficient to sell through a product, we donate the goods to local food banks before they reach their best before dates. That's some successes possibly, but there are other things where there's much more of a juggling act, or at least some difficult decisions to be taken. Do we switch entirely to using recycled paper in all our office work and our materials and publications, thereby increasing our costs and having less funds available to support producers? When we're looking at rice packaging, we need to balance food quality and safety with the ethics of the packaging itself. We looked at moving to compostable packaging, but discovered it could easily start to compost before the best before date of the rice. So that's obviously no good. And we've been advised to seek out recyclable plastic. But we also need to avoid waste here. To get a decent price on the film that we use to bag the rice, we buy it in considerable bulk. We obviously don't want to throw out unused films simply to make that switch to recyclable packaging sooner, because we've already got the film. If we reduce the amount of paper we put in a box as we pack our boxes for dispatch, if we reduce that too much, we'll incur more damages in transit and therefore food waste. This year, we've included in our business plan that we want to start the journey to net zero. But the first thing we need to decide is the scope of that. how far back in the supply chain do we go? From the point of leaving the producer, or do we include the whole of the producer's emissions as well? And how far through the supply chain? To the point where it leaves our warehouse, or the point where it arrives at a customer, or to the point of final consumption? Questions that we just don't currently know the answer to, but we need to work on and decide. And do we stick with easily recyclable glass packaging for our sources, or aim for some lighter packaging that would contribute less in carbon emissions as we transport it, but isn't as easily recyclable? So hopefully, and on the screen there's possibly some areas there that I've not specifically mentioned, but hopefully you can see there's lots for us to consider. And in all this, as a fair trade business, we need to keep our producers very much in mind. And to that end, as Catherine and Martin have both said, I'd now like to close with a video message from our coconut milk producer in Sri Lanka. If you bear with me just a second, I'll try and work out how to make sure that that works.
අයිබෝන් මගේ නම නදීෂා මදුමාලි මගේ පස් දෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා අම්මයි තාත්තයි මහත්තයා ඉලෙක්ට්‍රික් ගොවිතැන් වැඩ කරන්නේ ඊට අමතරව ඉලෙක්ට්‍රික් වැඩ කරනවා බබාලා තුන් දෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා ලොකු දුව මේ සැරේ A level කරන්නේ දෙවෙනි දුව 8 වසර ඉගෙන ගන්නේ පුතා පෙර පාසල් යනවා මේ අවුරුද්දේ කහයිඟුරු එල්ලවලු වගා කරනවා පළතුරු වගාව පුලත් පොල් ඇහිඳිනවා පොල් හදද්දී පොල් එකතු කරනවා ගණන් දානවා මාස දෙකකින් දෙකට තමයි පොල් හැදෙන්නේ පොල් 1000ක් දවසට පොල් ගෙඩි එකමාරක් විතර දවසකට වෙනවා ඊටර ටික තමයි ඉතින් එකමයි සහතික වෙලා කන්නේ සමාගමත් එක්ක එකතුලා වැඩ කරන එක හොඳයි කියලා ප්‍රතිලාභ ලැබෙනවා දැනුමක් ලැබෙනවා මේසි අඩු වෙනවා කාලයකට වැඩි වෙනවා මේක ආවම පොල් ප්‍රමාණය අසන්න අඩු වෙනවා දස්වාතේ ලෙලි වලවල් සකස් කිරීම පසතේදී යනකොට කාණු කැපීම ගල් වැටි එල්ලීම දේශගුණික විපර්යාසයත් එක්ක සමිතියත් එක්ක අපි කතා කරලා ජල ව්‍යාපෘතියක් කරගෙන යන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ සාධාරණ වෙළඳාමකට සහාය දුන්නට ගොඩක් ස්තුතියි. අපේ පොල් සාධාරණ මිලට ගත්තට ගොඩක් ස්තුතියි. අපේ පවුලේ ඉස්සරලාම මේ වැඩසටහනට බැඳුනේ මගේ මහත්මයා නැති වෙලා දැන් අවුරුදු 10ක් වෙනවා. ඒ එක්කම මේ වැඩසටහන මම නතර කරේ නෑ, දිගටම කරගෙන ගියා. මට දැන් පුතාලා 3 දෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා. දැන් පුතාලා 3 දෙනාම බැඳලා යාලා වෙනම නිවාස හදාගෙන වෙනම ජීවත් වෙන්නේ. දැන් මම තමයි මේ නිවසේ ඉන්නේ මගේ බාල පුතත් එක්ක. බාල පුතත් බැඳලා දැන් පොඩි සමග ජීවත් වෙන්නේ. එදිනදා මම විතරම වගේ මගේ වත්තේ වැඩ තමයි මම කරන්නේ. ඉතින් අමිල පුතායි මම වත්තේ වැඩ කරගෙන යන්නේ. මේ උදේ නැගිට්ටාම ඉදම වටේ ඇවිදලා තමයි මම වෙන පොල් එකතු කරලා ගෙදර ගෙනත් දාලා තමයි උදේ ගෙදර වැඩ වලට සහභාගී. ඉංගුරු කරාබ් බොරට ඒ අතරට කෙසෙල් ගස්ලා මගේ ගොවිපළ කාබනික වශයෙන් කරන මොකක් සාධාරණ වෙනදාමක් කරන බලපෑම් වෙලා තියෙනවා. මේ දැන් අවුරස්නිය වැඩි නියඟ කාලෙට ගස්වල කොළ අතු පාත් වෙලා පොල් වලු උඩට පාත් වෙනවා. සමහර වෙලාවට දැහැලෙනවා. ඒ අවස්ථාවවලදී ඉතින් අපි ජල විජාපෘතියක් කරන්න තමයි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ. ඉතින් වතුර සඳහා පවතින විදියට තමයි ලෙලි වලවල් සකස් කරලා කාණු කපලා කාණු වලත් ලෙලි දාලා ජලාශිත කරගත්තාම ටිකක් අර මුල් වලට ඇදිලා යනවාම ගහේ කාණවත් යතියක් තාම අපි ඉල්ලලක් නැහැ. ඉදිරියේදී ඉල්ලන්න අවශ්‍යතාවය තියෙනවා. ජල විජාපෘතියක් තමයි කරගන්නේ.
Hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight into just one of our producer groups and both the challenges and adaptations that they're making. I'll hand back now to Catherine.
Thank you, Tracy, and thanks to Ma's Kitchen for their video contribution this morning. And thank you to you for sharing your action plan and Craig's got his coconut milk up on screen. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, and thank you for raising some of the difficult questions and considerations that you're working with, for opening the session and for sharing the message that there's a bigger picture when it comes to fair trade. It's about balancing respect for the environment along with the other fair trade principles, including a commitment to your producers and suppliers such as Ma's Kitchen. Thanks, Tracy. And a warm welcome now to Miriam Adcock, who joins us from Zeroway Scotland, where she's worked for 12 years, mostly focused on what we can all do as individuals and communities to make better use of the resources we have and to reduce waste. She'll give us the context by talking us through Scotland's carbon footprint and how to take action as responsible consumers. Over to you, Miriam.
Good morning. Right, first challenge. share the screen. Great. Is that showing correctly? Fantastic, that's great, thank you. And good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me along, and thanks, Tracy. That was brilliant to hear. And I was quite pleased you hadn't gone down the road of compostable packaging, because there's a whole host of issues with that. If anyone needs more information, just get in touch. But I work for Zeroway Scotland, which is an organisation funded by the Scottish Government and European Regional Development Fund to look at resources across Scotland. And I was particularly asked to talk today about our carbon impact and some research that we've done recently. So last year we did a load of research about the carbon sort of impact in Scotland. And as a result of it, launched this campaign that you can see on the screen about consuming responsibly, and about trying to get the message across that everything we buy has a carbon cost. Hopefully my slide has moved on, let me know if not. But what we established was that 82% of our carbon footprint in Scotland comes from consumption. So from all the goods, materials and services that we produce, use, and in the case of products, often throw out after just one use. So like that compostable packaging or the plastic packaging, a lot of those things. And we often get the feedback, oh, we're just Scotland, we're just a small place, we don't have much impact on the world. But actually almost half of these emissions are produced overseas, where we import so many of our things from. So we can't just look at Scotland, we can't blame the rest of the world. We are part of a bigger picture and we need to act accordingly. And to put it into perspective, the carbon footprint per person in Scotland is 13 tonnes of CO2 emissions, compared to a world average of just 1.2 tonnes. So we are particularly bad at this. You know, we really need to address what we're doing in order to reach the Paris Agreement goal of reducing warming to 2 degrees. So you know, we are all responsible for this. We also launched a material flow account last week or the week before, which was looking at the flow of materials in and out of Scotland, so built on that research from last year. So it looked at the domestically extracted materials. So this could be things like our gas and wood, things that we extract and produce here. The imported raw materials, so things from steel to laptop to fruit and vegetables, and then the exported raw materials. So things like oil and gas, whiskey and clothes that we ship overseas. And you can see the spread here. There's a lot more information on our website. I'm not going to go into any of the detail, but there's a link at the top here, and I'll give the slides to the organisers and you can get hold of those if you want them and have a look at that. So I think one thing in the current situation with Russia is as well, when you look at this, you think there's a lot of things that we get in from overseas, which, you know, for some of it, like a lot of food produce and things may actually be better for the environment to come in from overseas because they have the climate to grow these things. But with other raw materials, it may be that there are things that we are relying on the likes of Russia or Ukraine to supply. And when situations happen like currently, then there is a big issue that, you know, there's a scarcity and it affects prices as well. So that's why we do a lot of work looking at something called the circular economy, which is all about trying to keep resources within Scotland more and make better use of things, reuse things, repair things, and all of that. So that is a big focus of ours, which if you're a business owner might sound like it might sound a bit scary and like we might be impacting on your business, but actually research has shown that we can use less resources without shrinking our economy. And the figures prove that. So between 2011 and 2017, our economy grew by 11%, whilst our resource use was actually declining. So we can decouple economic growth from resource growth, but we're not doing it quick enough. We need to do far more. And it's not just about recycling, it's about reducing the materials that we consume. And there is lots of support for that. So again, if you are a business owner, there is a website there, our Circular Economy Accelerator, with loads and loads of advice on how you can do that, how you can reduce your impact on resources, how you can maybe offer products in different ways. There's case studies and all sorts of support, so worth having a look. But also from our point of view, we need to push this message to individuals as well. So hence this campaign, encouraging people to think about how they shop differently. As part of the research we did around that, we did a lot of interviewing people and got a lot of feedback as well. And some of the challenges that came up, I would like to think are also opportunities. So the first one, 46% of people think they're already doing all they can. I don't know who these people are, but I don't know anyone who's doing everything they could possibly do. So there is an opportunity for us as Zeroway Scotland, but also for businesses out there to help show people other things they can do. And as individuals, investigate other things that you could be doing. A lot of people are blaming businesses. They want to see businesses doing more to tackle climate change. Again, I see this as an opportunity for businesses to differentiate yourself. So showing what you are doing to tackle climate change to make you stand out from the competition, in the same way as promoting your fair trade credentials makes you stand out from the others and is a good selling point. Your environmental credentials are can be a similar benefit. And the last one, there is this misconception that recycling is one of the most effective ways we can help climate change. And again, there's an opportunity there for us to show that actually there are things better than recycling. I don't know if you've seen the waste hierarchy, but reduce and reuse are up there above recycling. If we can reduce and reuse things, that's not going to, it's going to mean we don't need to recycle things so much, because recycling does use resources, it uses energy, it uses a lot of causes issues. And compostables items I would throw in there as well, that they have a lot of issues which we can address another time if anyone's got any questions. But just to finish off with, as individuals, so what can we all do in our daily lives? Well, I think use what you have, so such as reducing food waste, which Tracy touched on beautifully there. So yeah, if we can make sure we don't throw food away. So I am pleased to say I did open a tin of coconut milk last weekend to make something, and it only used 100 ml of it. So I have since made 2 other dishes this week using coconut milk to use all that up, and they were all delicious. So that was my bit of making sure I didn't waste any of that tin this week. Look after what you have. So things like textiles have a huge carbon impact, and 32% of our carbon impact is from textiles. So making sure that if we have clothes, we look after them, we wash them at the right temperature, we repair them, all these sorts of things. You know, the most environmentally friendly thing is always the one that you already have. So look after it. Buy things to last and that you'll use again and again. So, you know, if we're actually invited out to a grand ball or something, chance to be a fine thing at the moment, is it worth going and buying something just for that you're only going to wear once? You know, only really we should be buying things that we are going to make good use of. And if we can't make good use of it, could we rent it or could we borrow it? There's some fantastic Scottish companies out there now renting clothes and doing different sort of schemes, or swap shops. So lots of different alternatives. And ditch the disposables. And I've put in brackets whatever they are made of. This is back to my bugbear that you may gather from the fact it's the 3rd time I've mentioned it. Compostables are not always the answer. If we can avoid anything that is single use, that is disposable, then that is going to help. So that's me. There's some links there. You can get some more information or you can get in touch with me. But thank you very much. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks a lot, Miriam. That was really interesting, and your message is clear that we need to change the way that we consume now. It'd be interesting to find out what percentage of the footprint is fair trade consumption. Just a reminder that we're going to have a short Q&A at the end of the session, so please, as we go along, pop your questions in the chat box, and Martin's keeping an eye on them for later. So our next speaker will explain the background to hyperconsumption that has become the norm nowadays, and which is, as we have heard, contributing in no small way to climate change. Gerard Hastings is Professor Emeritus at Stirling University, and for the last 4 decades, he studied the damaging impacts that commercial marketing has on our health and well-being. In discussing his latest book, Hyperconsumption, Corporate Marketing versus the Planet, Gerard will offer us some hope that we are caring, critically aware human beings. Gerard pre-recorded his presentation due to Wi-Fi connection concerns, but he joins us on the call today, and I'm just going to share his video.
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. What I would like to do over the next 10 minutes is just explore this question. Why is it that we consume so much more than our parents did, than our grandparents did, all the time? Just one statistic to illustrate the position we've got ourselves into, the crazy position. The average supermarket in the UK holds no less than 40,000 different product lines. It takes 11 hours just to count to 40,000. So how did we end up in this crazy, crazy position? 2 answers I would give to that question. First of all, we certainly didn't end up here by accident. There was very definitely a plan to get us to go down this route. Secondly, that we can resist this plan, we can roll back this plan, that we can do things differently. So whilst I will start in the dark, we will very definitely move into the light and look to a hopeful future. But first of all, the plan. If we go back 120 years or so, 2 convulsions changed very profoundly the way we live our lives. First of all, we came up with the ideas of mass production. So suddenly there's a way of making an enormous quantity of consumer goods, far more than had ever been before. At the same time, the market, which heretofore had been made up of lots of little businesses, became consolidated into a much smaller number of big operators. The modern business corporation was born. And these new corporations, they became known as robber barons indeed, were extremely powerful and extremely wealthy. But they were also nervous. The threat that they could see is that the mass production techniques that were producing lots and lots of stuff ran the risk of all this stuff being in greater supply than were the demands of the market. And if supply outstrips demand, then it becomes a buyer's market. That reduces their margins, their profits, and their power. Their saviour took the form of a man called Edward Bernays, who wrote a book in 1928 called simply Propaganda. And for Bernays, advertising was the new propaganda, and it could get us trolling along to the shops happily and readily. As a later commentator pointed out, the function of this advertising was that of waging a war on behalf of producers and sellers of consumer goods, a relentless war against saving and in favour of consumption. Before we go any further, it's worth pausing for a moment and remembering that word propaganda. Propaganda does not tell the truth, nor does advertising. Advertisers sell us Coca-Cola, but don't tell us about the diabetes. They sell us the pleasure of stuff, but not the cost and corrosion of materialism. They lie to us continuously and continually. And as Hannah Arendt, the philosopher, pointed out, this has really serious repercussions. When everyone lies all the time, the result is not that you believe the lies, but that nobody believes anything anymore. The people who can't believe can't form opinions. They are deprived not just of their ability to act, but also their ability to think and make judgments. With such people, you can do whatever you want. The lies of the advertisers were soon joined by a more complex and sophisticated discipline, marketing, which is neatly defined as making what you can sell, not selling what you can make, and sounds on the surface like quite a good idea. The problem with it is it's created a system where marketers study us incredibly well. They want to know not just our needs, but our wants and our whims. They find out our vulnerabilities. They find out how best to sell us more stuff. And with this insight, they can apply a whole variety of tools, not just advertising and propaganda, but product design, packaging, point of sale, pricing, everything, every time of the day and night. The growth in this marketing industry was absolutely stratospheric. By the turn of the millennium, it employed some 30 million people and drove consumer spending worth $5 trillion a year. Since then, digital technology has come into its force, and we have entered what Shoshone Zuboff calls the age of surveillance capitalism, where the corporate marketers know more about us than our own mothers did, and they can sell us anything, anywhere, anytime. But we aren't the only ones who are in their crosshairs. Two other key groups are also very much targeted by the corporate marketer. Firstly, children. It's crucial that future generations, coming generations, take on this same role of hyperconsumption. They're important, as this business textbook says, in their own right. They have money of their own. They influence their parents' selection of products and brands. And most chillingly, they will grow up to be the consumers of everything. The second group that are also very much of interest to the marketers is politicians, because they set the rules of the market, the regulatory frameworks and so on. They too are pulled on side, as John Dewey remarked 100 years ago now. Politics in general is an echo, except when it is an accomplice of the interests of big business. It is the shadow cast on society by big business. So it's little surprise then that we have turned into hyper-consumers. So much effort and time and skill has been focused on making us do so. But all is not lost. As Seamus Heaney expressed it, there is hope. History says don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. We are at just such a juncture now, as our impact of our consumption behaviour on the climate and on the planet is becoming so obvious. It is clearly a moment of reflection and rethinking. And we are more than capable of doing this. We are human beings, not mere consumers, intrinsically capable of greatness. We are Mahatma Gandhis and Rosa Parks, not Zuckerbergs and Bezos, let alone their playthings. We have moral agency. We can imagine better. We can do better. And as Rowan Williams says, even as we begin this process, so we could bring great benefits. We can, as he says, escape the toxicity of the mindset that brought us to this pass. No small thing in an era when people are getting very stressed by what is happening to the natural world. But we can also go one step further. We can do better still. And here for me, fair trade is an important beacon. It does great good in its own right. People benefit from it here and now. But it's also a great symbol of human potential, how that we can do better, we can look after each other, we are capable of mutual benefit. And indeed, it reminds us that marketing itself is not something invented by the corporate sector. It's as old as human society. We've always done business. And as long as the participants in the business process have an equal amount of power, so it works really well. The problems happen when massive power intervenes, as it does with the major corporations of today. So we can do better. And the indigenous wisdom, the people of the wisdom of indigenous people, remind us how true this is. This is Thomas Jefferson writing in 1787. At this point in history, only part of the United States had been conquered. He looked across the country and said, I am convinced that those Indian societies which live without government enjoy in their general mass an infinitely greater degree of happiness than those who live under European governments. There are alternatives, and they are alternatives that produce happiness and contentment. Ours is an economic system built on acquisition, extraction, and perpetual growth. We have been forced, encouraged, trained to be complicit in this activity. Indigenous wisdom shows that there are alternatives. We can do better. Let me finish with the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson. So a thought and you reap an action. So an act and you reap a habit. So a habit and you reap a character. So a character and you reap a destiny. It is time for a new sowing, and we are more than capable gardeners. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much to Gerard for sharing some extremely thought-provoking insights as discussed in your new book, and leaving us with the thought that it's time for change and that we are capable of making that change. Your kind suggestion also that we're expert gardeners leads us rather well to introducing an expert cocoa farmer. Deborah Osei-Mensah is a registered youth cocoa farmer and lead trainer of the Asunafo North Cooperative Cocoa Farmers and Marketing Union Limited in Ghana. She also doubles up as the Operations Manager and Livelihood Development Officer of the Union and leads the monitoring and evaluation team. Deborah is also Youth Ambassador for Fairtrade Africa, and she'll discuss how they're dealing with the climate crisis as producers and the difference being Fairtrade certified makes to cocoa farmers in general and in dealing with climate change. So welcome, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. Let me start by saying about 10 years ago, farmers saw climate change or received the news of climate change as a kind of a dream, because in no way were we expecting what we are expecting right now. But for the past 4 years, each day climate change is giving us a new reality, a new difficulty to face. We can say the world is at war with climate change, and we farmers are in the front line. And so things are becoming a little bit difficult for us. But of course, we have leverage because of the support from Fairtrade than other farmers who are not satisfied. When you come to farming, especially cocoa farming, over the past 4 years, we've been experiencing some kind of changes that is really affecting farmers' livelihood. The first change I want to talk about is a low yield, the low productivity in our cocoa. Now, in a cocoa farm, it's quite difficult to get the exact amount that you expect, the exact productivity that we expect. As we calculated like 10 years ago, in the next 10 years, this is my productivity line. Now, it's not so. Why? Because taking this season, for example, from last year, June, from June to December, there was this heavy rain almost every week. So this rain caused a lot of floodings in our farms and then a lot of erosion. And then also right after the rain, there was this heavy sunshine that dries up the earth. You could see holes in the earth. You see the earth is so dry from water. And so all these factors from climate change and also what we experienced was invasion of crop diseases and pests. Some pests that we've never seen on our farms, we're now seeing it. We've seen increase in diseases, black pod during the rain season, and then during the heavy sunshine, we see the small pod who needs regular weather conditions. You see this, and once it happens like that, there's no way you can add it to your productivity. So with all these factors in place, this year we are expecting about not less than 15% decrease in productivity. Looking at what we had within the major season where farmers that were even supposed to harvest more, they were now harvesting low. So we are expecting not less than 15% decreases in the total production for this season. And also one thing we could see is climate change is really threatening the livelihood and food security, livelihood of farmers, and then food security on the larger basis. Why am I saying that? You know, most of our farmers, they depend on their small farms to survive, to take care of their homes. So the incomes from these small farms, that is what is keeping them, their family, their children in school. And now, due to climate change, they are not getting the expected income. Rather, they are investing more into the farms because there have to be measures to make sure you don't lose your farm entirely. So we see that this climate is not just lessening our productivity, but it's also threatening the livelihood of farmers, and then also food security as well. Because a farmer, after collecting the produce, has to feed the family before he takes some of the produce to the market. Now, if the food is expecting to get feed and then take it to the market, they are not getting that much. After feeding the family, if there's nothing to take to the market, it means the rest of the people in the world who are dependent on these farmers to get food will also not get it. So we see climate change not just affecting farmers, but at the end, it's going to bring a very serious issue in the food security as well. And then also we are looking at climate change threatening the sustainability of farming. Now we are looking at making farming more sustainable in years to come. We'll still get cocoa, we'll still get chocolate, we'll get coconut, we'll get sugar, and then other produce. But what happens is you cannot depend on the farm you've grown 20 years back to still produce in 20 years ahead. So each year you try to plant new one to replace the old one. Now the survival rate of this new plant is being threatened. Initially, for about 4 or 5 years ago, when you plant like 100 crops, at the end of the day, you can get about 80% of them survive. But now, if you are lucky, the best you can do is 50% of your new seedlings surviving. And so if this keeps happening, then it becomes difficult to sustain your farm. For example, about 3 years ago, I started a new farm. I wanted to get the on-site experience with starting a farm. I started a little bit, an acre with 322, and I had to plant it over and over for about 2 years before I could get 80% of my seedlings surviving. Even this year, I went there about a month ago, and the plants that are about 2 years, some have started dying. And so it means I have to go back and then do it again. So if it keeps happening like this, then farmers will no longer invest in their farm, but they also look at other trading activities to do. So when that happens, then our sustainability of farming is also being threatened. And then away from our farms, when we come to our farming communities, like my community, for example, we depend mostly on rivers for household choices and then other activities in the house. And then also for our farms, applying fertilizers and other things on our farm, we depend on these river bodies. Now, because of the drought, these river and streams are drying out. And so it's very difficult to get clean access. We have animals in our farm. They are also dependent on these streams. So once the stream is drying out, the humans and then the animals in the community will all depend on this. And so the health related issues on this stream becomes also difficult. So in our community, our streams, our wells, our rivers, they are all drying out, and it's becoming very difficult. And when this happens, it doesn't just affect the household. It brings a lot of social issues. For example, in our setting, it's the child or the children that's supposed to fetch water. And so when these rivers are drying out, it means they have to go as far as they can to bring water before they go to school. And once the place to fetch water is very far, it means the children will be late for school, they'll be tired, and it's more or less creating a picture of our child labor, which is something we want to take out of our cocoa system. So these are some of the issues affecting us. Of course, we Fairtrade certified producers have a leverage compared to the conventional producers. Why? Because for us, we have our Fairtrade premiums that support us in my community. We have 2 mechanized boreholes. So the river that we depend on, the moment it dries up, we have our borehole to support our so that we go to school on time without. And also with Fairtrade, with the climate change, information sharing is very important. So each and every time, Fairtrade keeps educating us, training our members on some of the resilient activities members are to undertake. So this is also one thing we are having. And then also, because it's threatening livelihood, Fairtrade also supports farmers, train farmers on livelihood activities. Just last year, Fairtrade supported us through the Recover African project, and we're able to train more than 800 women in alternative livelihood. We have soap, the soap which is made from the cocoa husk. And then we have those in pastries, we have those in African beads making and other things. And these farmers who benefited are really having a good income. Now that the cocoa is not giving much of the income, these farmers with these trainings are getting the needed income. And then also we have other projects from Fairtrade, like the dynamic agroforestry, where Fairtrade is training farmers and supporting farmers to intercrop our new seedlings with other crops and trees, which will be as a shade for the seedlings. So this activity, the dynamic agroforestry, is really helping increase the survival rate of our new plants. And then also we have the carbon credit, Fairtrade carbon credits, where farmers are assured that once they engage in resilient activities, they use safe and then better cook stoves, and then also practice this dynamic agroforestry and stuff. At the end of the day, they are going to get extra premium to support their activities. And then also as a union with our Fairtrade premium, each year we make sure we raise tree seedlings for farmers so that in their old plants, they can plant the trees in 2-3 years' time. The plants will get cover, shade to protect them from heavy rainfall and then sunlight. So this, in a nutshell, is what is happening in the cocoa sector, especially in Ghana, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Cameroon, and then other countries as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for joining us and for sharing how climate change is impacting on your productivity, your livelihoods, and bringing up the issue of food security. It's good to hear about the agroforestry and how Fairtrade supports you with training and with other projects in your community to deal with the impacts of climate change. Thank you for joining us today. We're now going to move on to Tim Aldred, Head of Policy at the Fairtrade Foundation, to talk to us about this year's Fairtrade Fortnight campaign, and he'll talk about business and what we want to see from them, what we want to see from government, and what Fairtrade is doing for climate justice. Over to you, Tim.
Hi everyone, and it is nice to be back in Glasgow virtually. It was a great pleasure to get out of the house post-pandemic and come to Glasgow for the COP summit. It felt like quite a privilege to have the opportunity to do that alongside some of our fair trade producers from around the world, and a strange experience, but it was very nice to be in Glasgow. And the risk, of course, of coming at the end is that everyone else has made all the points that you are going to make, but much better. And I think no more so than Deborah, who has explained very clearly how the climate change that we've talked about for so many decades, it's now with us and is very real. And this matters to us as citizens of the UK. Around 12% of our food does not come from our near neighbours. I mean, half of it is imported, but 12% of it comes from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America. So Deborah's challenges are our challenges. That's our food, and that is under such pressure. We're in close relationships, and I suppose one of the principles of fair trade, that we understand that we're in a close relationship with our farmers around the world, is something that really hasn't been taken seriously for so many years, and time is running out. Deborah's challenge again, she referred to the problems of growing cocoa, that it's getting harder to grow cocoa. We did a study, we commissioned a study from 2 universities looking at, well, what's the situation for fair trade producers in general. It came out November last year. It's on the Fairtrade International website if you want to go and have a look. And it basically said, well, this is happening everywhere. This is happening to all of our fair trade producers. They're all under pressure from extreme weather, from higher temperatures, from more dry days, more sustained dry days, so long drought periods essentially. And that's our food. It's getting worse. It's a big problem. Being here in Glasgow, you know, we had that frustrating experience. We know that we want to keep it to 1.5 degrees of temperature rise, and the best we're doing at the moment, we've made a small step in Glasgow, but we're still on a temperature rise predicted of 2.4 degrees. But actually, as Deborah has explained, 1.5 degrees isn't safe. We're still going to have to take account of a whole set of very difficult changes across our society, but perhaps especially for our food. No, not wine specifically. It's looking at about 5 or 6 products. Issues would be very similar, Kate. One of the promises, I'm just going to go back to COP a minute, because they promised us $100 billion a year in climate finance for adaptations. That's money for farmers like Deborah, or it should be. Why? It sounds like a lot of money. Why do you need so much money? Well, we are doing climate projects at the moment in Fairtrade together with farmers, and we worked out, it's a bit of the back of the envelope, but we worked out that if we were to do something sensible by way of a climate project to support and help prepare farmers for climate change, we've got about 1.8 million farmers in the Fairtrade system. It would probably cost us £250 million a year. So if you multiply that up by the 500 million smallholder farmers that there are in the world, you're quickly heading up for those kinds of £100 billion levels. And that's not something that you need to provide just on a one-off basis and then you've done with it. That's a sustained amount of finance that's needed. The good news was that, well, you know, we essentially have a promise that is coming, and it all sounds very nice. But what the farmers who are with us last November said is, well, show us the money. You know, you've been making this promise for a long time. show us the money. Where is it? We've not seen any of it. Things are happening right now on the farm, and we know what to do. Deborah has outlined for you some of the practical projects that are underway, which do make a difference. So I guess one of our messages to government at this point is things are difficult. It matters to farmers, but it matters to us in the UK. This is our food as well. And we want to see change. You've made this promise, so please deliver it, and please ensure that this finance will start to begin reaching farmers. And that's the heart of our Fairtrade Fortnight message, really. That's why there's a campaign action that that you can take off the Fairtrade Foundation website to that end, and we would love it if you would support us in that. But I can't do a talk on climate change without coming to, I suppose, the tension that often comes up, and I think I saw it in Lorraine in your question earlier on in the chat line, because okay, it's trade, right? So we're moving stuff around the world. So doesn't that mean transport miles? Doesn't that mean more consumption? How do we come at this as responsible consumers? And I suppose the first thing that I want to say is our view is that everybody should do the most sustainable thing. So consume less, shop more responsibly, buy local if you can. All of this is great to do, and we really would want to encourage and support that. But sometimes doing the most sustainable thing is a bit more complicated than it looks. For example, flowers. Now, just put your hand up if you either received or you gave some flowers for Christmas or for Valentine's Day, or you think you might get some for Mother's Day. Yeah, so a few hands going up there. Yeah, and so that's happened in the winter. And I wonder if you thought about where those flowers came from. Now, if they had come from the Netherlands, or if they had come from Kenya, you might think, well, it's probably the Netherlands that's going to be the more responsible choice. But actually, if you're doing that in winter, and they've come from a greenhouse which has been heated with fossil fuels, the sums are, and this is not me saying it, it's sort of independently corroborated, it's actually 5 times less carbon if you get them from Kenya, because you're not having to heat the greenhouse. And that's even with the air transport. Now, I didn't believe that figure when I was told it, and I've looked at it very carefully. It's actually correct. So at this point, it's a flowers from Kenya at all. So it's a difficult question. The next part of this is, well, what could we do? You know, if we switch from flying to shipping by sea transport, that carbon budget comes down by 95%. So what we need to do is switch from flying the flowers to shipping them, perhaps in refrigerated in shipping. That will bring the sums down even further. And we need to look at doing things like this now, or we need to stop buying flowers. But if we stop buying flowers, then, you know, as Tracy has sort of referenced in her talk, what happens to the people who are growing those products? And there are about maybe it's a lot of people just in Kenya. It's probably about 180 million people who depend on the jobs that are there from the flower industry. Okay, that's all a bit complicated. The point is, we need to think about these issues. We need to work on them. We need to invest in them, and it's going to cost more. If we are, if you do there was a phrase, it was dynamic agroforestry. If you do adopt new production methods in cocoa, it really helps you be resilient to climate change, but it costs more. And so we need to sort of be ready to rebalance the scales. We can't make this change, we can't make this transition if we're going to stick in this model where we just sort of suck all the finance and the money and the benefit to ourselves in richer nations. If we need a rebalancing where we are genuinely prepared to share the benefits and the money with the people who are actually growing the stuff that we are consuming, as part of an overall picture of reducing and becoming more sustainable overall, using less, wasting less in our overall pattern of consumption. It's really important. It is complicated. We need to, we can play our parts, but some of these things are tricky and they need investment and time and energy. But that energy is worth it. It's worth making the push, because we can go from, you know, the level of carbon that's used in flowers at the moment to, you know, 1/20th of that, if we're prepared to make the change. So there's lots more that I could talk about, but we have 5 minutes left in our meeting time. So I will stop there. It's lovely to be with you. And at the Fairtrade Foundation, you know, it's great to have so many other collaborators and organisations that are out there working. Businesses like Tracy, you know, we need the input from deep thinkers like Gerard, and of course, you know, we can't do it without farmers who actually grow our food. And Deborah, it's lovely to have you on the call today. It's great to meet you up virtually. Catherine, I'm going to leave it there and pass back to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was an excellent summing up of all of the points made by the different speakers today. I'm aware of time, so just in case there's a couple of questions that have come up, because we're due to finish in a couple of minutes, I'm going to hand back to Martin.
Thanks, Catherine. I think, to be honest, in terms of most of the questions that have been asked, people have answered in the chat as we've been going through. In terms of, I think Jim Sharp, had a question with regards to some of the detail in Miriam's report, and she's actually put the link into the report, so that's in the chat so people can get that. We've had, obviously, their discussion, and Tim has picked up on it, around some of the choices about where we buy goods from, and in terms of looking at some of those issues. And I think the key point there that people have made in the chat, and Tim was making, is that it's about weighing up all the different aspects of it. In terms of the environmental impact, carbon footprint is part of that, and you know, transport, which is normally what we think about when we think about this issue. People start by asking about, what about the air miles, what about the travel? But that's one aspect of the climate footprint, and climate footprint is one aspect of a wider environmental impact. And then the environmental impact, in terms of, isn't just about some of the environmental choice, but also you need to think about, we need to, you know, some of the issues in terms of the social and economic issues in terms of the fuel the climate crisis. So I think there's been some discussion of that in the chat, in terms of, and a top tip that in terms of the coconut milk freezes apparently very well, and so you don't have to have the same in terms of use it 3 times in a week, I think is the top tip of actual the day on that. So I don't think there's any questions there that are really essentially unanswered, and we picked it up on in the chat. So I think in terms of just time and saying we'd finish on time, I just want to end by firstly saying a big thank you to all of our speakers, to Tracy and to Nadisha and Sharana, to Miriam, to Gerard, to Deborah, and to Tim. And I think in terms of, in conclusion, I suppose, you know, Fairtrade is a model for doing business for people and for planet. We've seen this morning how Fairtrade businesses are concerned with the respect for the environment, for people and for the planet. We've heard about the carbon cost of consumption, hyperconsumption, and the need for change. It's people like on this call today who are at the forefront of leading that change as consumers, and making those informed choices, informing ourselves. And I think one of the key issues that's come out with this is actually informing ourselves so actually we can make informed choices about the impact of what we do. But it's clearly farmers like Deborah, Nadish and Sharana who are at the forefront of dealing with the climate crisis, adapting their farming practices in the light of climate change. And they are the experts, and governments need to listen to them. One of the key messages that we took to COP26 as a fair trade movement was that not only are farmers across the world in terms of at the front of the climate emergency in terms of feeling the effects and the impacts of it, they are also at the forefront of finding the solutions and delivering on those solutions, and therefore they need the support to do that work in terms of the climate finance that was talked about by Tim. The climate crisis is not fair, and fair trade is needed now more than ever before. And we'll continue here in Scotland and across the UK to add our voices to the voices of the fair trade farmers and workers, and who are making that message clear that we need trade justice in order to achieve climate justice. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you to the contributors, and hopefully enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of Fairtrade Fortnight. Thank you.